right. Hello and welcome to the Undisputed MMA show presented by the FTN Network. My name is Jonah Shiffman. I am joined, as always, by my co-host, John Kelly. And we also got special guest, friend of the show, head of NHL content over at Numberball. We got Evan Cheney joining us for a three-man booth this week. We're also going to bring in a fourth man, our guy Connor from FTN Daily. He's going to be talking DFS towards the end of the show, but we're going to have three-man booth for UFC 266. We're going through 13 fights. Volkanovski versus Ortega. And gentlemen, how are we doing? John, I will kick it off with you. It feels like forever since we've had a pay-per-view week. It's been like 6 weeks, and it feels like it's been months. So I'm certainly excited. We got those big DK prize pools back in our lives, and a lot of spots I'm looking forward to betting on this card. How about you?
Yeah, I'm super excited. UFC 266, we got a stacked card. We did lose one fight that got pushed, the Ferro Bueno Silva fight. We had Maximov Roberson. Roberson got replaced by Brundage. So we've had a couple changes this week, but overall it's a really fun slate. I'm excited to get into it with you guys. We'll see what Evan's been up to aside from swindling me in some CFFC bets. What's going on, Evan?
Dude, I actually forgot about that, but those were a fun night of fights too, because like for those who don't know, I go to my local Tiger Schulman and train Muay Thai, Jiu-Jitsu, whatever, and we had a guy get a knockout. That was a fun night. It's good taking your money, John. It bought drinks
there you
later
go.
that night. But yeah, no, I'm pumped for this card, man. That Roberson fight Roberson going off the card, that was the easiest money on the slate, quite honestly. But now there's some good fights coming up, and I'm excited to talk about it with you guys.
Yeah, I mean, we lost one of them. We did get a replacement. We do have 13 fights, so I don't want to spend too much time off the top here, especially because we're going to do a special DFS section towards the end of the show with Connor, as I did mention. But let's just get it kicked off right now. We got a fight here between Omar Moraes and Jonathan Pearce, also known as JSP, that I think is going to be pretty exciting to kick off the night. Current betting market has Omar Moraes as a minus 155 favorite. Pearce comes back about plus 135. We got DK prices for Moraes at 8.5K, and JSP comes back 7.7K. And like I mentioned, I think this is going to be an exciting fight. You know, these are two predominantly strikers. Omar Moraes has shown ability to pretty much kickbox with anyone he's been in the octagon with outside of Giga Chikadze to this point. And with Jonathan Pearce, you know, impressive performance on the Contender Series, lost his debut to Joe Lozon, but came out against Kai Kamaka, cashed a big underdog ticket for me his last time out. And I'm looking forward to watching these two guys throw this weekend. John, I'll kick it to you here first with Moraes and Pearce. Kind of what are your thoughts here? We've seen a little bit of JSP money come in this week, but not to the extent where the betting market has really moved much in either direction. I'm kind of curious your thoughts on the fight. Do you have any action on the first fight of the night?
I do, yeah. I actually bet Jonathan Pearce, my guy JSP, at plus 122. So it's actually moved against me a little bit, which was a little bit surprising. I bet it early in the week because I thought maybe it would get closer to a pick, but it seems like people like Moraes here. Moraes is, you know, he's a kickboxer, decent technical striker, but I think he can be beat. Like, I think his record's a little bit better than he is, and JSP looked very improved in his last fight. I trust him to just be a lot more active. You know, Omar Moraes, where he's a good technical striker, he's pretty low volume. You know, most of his fights, he's putting up anywhere from 50 to 60 strikes. He also struggles when you put pressure on him. Like we saw that in the Giga fight quite a bit, even the Benitez fight at times. Like, he doesn't fight off his back foot very well. It messes with his timing. So I like Pearce to just be very aggressive, move forward. He can mix in the takedowns as well. So I kind of trust his activity a lot more. And I just think he's the one who's still improving. Moraes is like 35 years old. Like, I think we've already seen the best of Omar Moraes. Like, that is what he is. And Pearce, I think, is still, you know, training at a good camp and fight ready. And again, I just keep going back to the activity. I just expect him to move forward, mix in the takedowns, and just do enough to win rounds. So I like the underdog here. I bet him at plus 122. Like I said, you could get a better number now, but yeah, I like JSP.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense. You know, you have historically been a JSP guy. JSP has fought up at 155 before, but his last fight looked good at 145 against Kamaka, and this fight's at 145 again. Evan, do you kind of put any stock into how JSP has looked at the two separate weight classes we've seen him at? And kind of regardless of that, what do you make of the fight? We know John is action on the first fight of the night. Do you have any side in the first fight of the night?
I haven't put a bet on this fight yet. I'm considering an Omar Morales bet. And the only reason I say that is because Pearce's wins have come via takedowns and then ground and pound, getting those knockouts. And Morales has shown very solid takedown defense in the fights where he's fought against people who are willing to go for takedowns. That hasn't always been the case in his fights, right? And just, kind of what I see from my own numbers, it's like Morales in his last 5 fights, he's defending 65% of strikes against him at distance. So really, I give Omar a slight edge. I don't mind the Pearce bet at that price. I think 135 is where I see him at right now. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, that price is fine. If the Morales number comes back down to minus 150, I'll kind of consider that bet. But right now, no action. But I think Omar has the edge here just because of that fighting style.
Yeah, I think I agree that I make Omar a small favorite in this spot. Evan obviously does a lot of work kind of with his own numbers and DK numbers that hopefully he'll be able to touch on throughout the show. But in general, like Omar Morales is just kind of a solid defensive fighter in general. We mentioned 65% striking defense at distance, but he's also had an 87% takedown defense. Now, granted, the best wrestler that he's fought is probably Shane Young, who is the man to take him down, maybe Gabriel Benitez, but Benitez isn't much of an offensive wrestler. So I think at the very least, we probably see Jonathan Pearce force Omar Morales to really show what he's got in terms of the defensive wrestling. Not that I think it's a path that I feel, or a path to victory that I feel super strongly that Morales can defend takedowns or that Pearce can land takedowns. I just think that that's kind of a question will get answered early on in this fight. No side for me here. I do think the under is mildly tempting. I just kind of think Jonathan Pearce is a guy who's going to lend himself to cashing unders more times than not. Goes forward with reckless abandon, super small sample size within the UFC, but is landing almost 9 strikes per minute while absorbing upwards of 6.5. That just kind of shows, small sample or not, he's moving forward. He's there to be hit, but he's also landing punches himself and landing takedowns. So I think the under a plus money is somewhat tempting, but no action for me on the first fight of the night. Let's move on to the second fight of the night, which is a fight that I actually do have a lot of action on between Matthew Semelsberger and Martin Sano. We got Semelsberger a minus 525 favorite right now. $9,400 on DraftKings is their second most expensive fighter, right behind Valentina Shevchenko this week. And for Martin Sano, 6.8K plus 400 as an underdog in this spot. And like I mentioned, I got a lot of money on this fight. I actually max bet Matthew Semelsberger at minus 350 earlier this week. Matthew Semelsberger is not a guy who I have historically been high on in the past. He's a guy who I lost a bet on Jason Witt against in about 15 seconds a few months ago. And I'm not a Semelsberger guy per se, but this bet is more so about the Martin Sano side as the underdog. And I don't want to, steal these two guys' thunder, but there isn't much to say about Martin Sano, in my opinion, from what I've seen on tape, outside of the fact that, this guy, he doesn't belong in the UFC. The reason he's here is he's really close friends with Nick Diaz, who's obviously in the featured bout, making his return to the octagon. But back to Sano, he hasn't, fought since 2017, which was a draw where he got out-grappled pretty badly in the opening rounds against pretty much a journeyman in Bellator against Diego Herzog. And then his previous 2 fights he lost. So his last win is literally in 2014. It's over 7 years ago at this point. And I know it's simple to just kind of look at those numbers and think, oh yeah, this guy doesn't belong. But the tape backs it up. The pure data backs it up. I just don't think Martin Sano kind of belongs here. And what we have seen from Semelsberger is he's able to throw volume, striking, his power to put guys out, and his wrestling is decent. I was worried coming into the UFC prior to the Jason Witt fight that I'd seen Semelsberger get stuck on his back a little bit. But honestly, I don't think that's much of a worry here because I've heard some people say, Sano needs to get the fight to the ground. In my opinion, he's pretty much fucked anywhere the fight goes. I just think he's going to struggle on the feet. I think he's going to struggle on the grappling. And I'm not normally the type to be laying a price like minus 350 on the money line. But I just think there's so much value in Semelsberger. I think he's closer to 90% to win the fight than he is 70% to win the fight. And it's certainly a spot I feel confident about rolling into this weekend. We'll kick it now to Evan for our second fight of the night. Obviously, the price on Semelsberger has gotten up there to minus 525. I'm kind of wondering, what do you make of the price at the current number? Is it an easy pass or kind of a spot that you still think provides value for Semelsberger? Or on the flip side, are you taking the shot on the dog here?
No, so I actually have some things to say here. I got a slightly worse number than you did on Semelsberger on Fox. like minus 355, I want to say off the top of my head. My model gives him a 75% chance of winning. And that might be undercounting just because it's not going to take into account like the non-UFC fights that Sano's it's taking in the market, Semelsberger stuff, whatever, right? And that was a good value on him. I put 5 units on Semelsberger to win that fight. I mean, you know, Sano hasn't really fought. He actually beat Jeff Neal like 5 years ago now. If that means anything at this point.
Even more. It's almost 8 years since he beat Jeff
8?
Neal.
8, yeah.
In a minute.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not like he hasn't fought UFC level competition before, but at the same time, just from what I've seen, just from the tape that I can look at, well, you know, film, whatever, and just based on what Semelsberger has been able to do in the UFC, I just don't see how he doesn't win. I mean, personally, I think he wins even more than 75% of the time, but at the current price, I think the best number you're getting on him right now is like 487, minus 487 at Unibet. I'm not sure if I laid that number, but you know, if it gets slightly worse or better, better is the word. You know, I would even smash that number again.
Yeah, I see a minus 455 at Bet Rivers, but it sounds like it's a consensus between Evan and I here on Semelsberger as a heavy chalk favorite. John, I will kick it to you here for your thoughts on this fight. And if you're on the same side with Semelsberger, I know we're going to go over DFS towards the end of the show, but kind of what do you make of him as a play? Right below Valentina Shevchenko, but second biggest favorite on the slate, second best inside the distance line on the slate, and probably at an ownership discount from Valentina, who is in a 5-round fight in the main.
Yeah, there's not really much to add here. Like the only reason Sano is getting this fight is because he's like the Diaz brothers' like best friend. That's basically it. Like he fought to a draw back in 2017. Didn't look good. I actually thought he lost that fight too. And prior to that, he was on a 2-fight losing streak. He's a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but I mean, hasn't been fighting for 4 years. Who knows if he's been training? He's been out with Nick Diaz, who we'll talk about later, just partying in Vegas. So yeah, I mean, what else is there to say? I think Semelsberger probably kills him early in this fight. In terms of DraftKings, I think Semelsberger is a very safe play. I don't know if I'd favor him over Valentina, just because I think Valentina is a little bit more safer, not just from the odds, but just in general. Like I think she's less likely to get finished, whereas, you know, in a heavier male weight class, you know, there's just more variance in general. But I mean, he's obviously one of the better plays on the slate. Macadre in the chat says if we're all going to be poor together if he loses. So I didn't bet Semelsberger because I missed it when Jonah put out the alert at FTN bets for the max play. So I didn't bet him, but if I do add like a late week parlay between like Semelsberger, Blaydes, maybe somebody else, like that might be an ad for me. If I can parlay like Valentina, Blaydes, Semelsberger and get plus money, I don't think that's a bad look.
I don't know if that'll equal plus money. I gotta think about it. But
it did when I looked earlier. It was plus 114, but again, the line's probably moved.
Yeah, but I mean, regardless, I think close to even money there. I'm not a parlay guy, as the people know, but those do seem like 3 guys and the girl who have a large shot at winning this week. Let's move on to the third fight of the night, which, you know, as mentioned in the chat, we might all be broke by the third fight of the night if Semi the Jedi doesn't come through in the second fight of the evening. But let's move on here. This is our a short notice replacement that we mentioned kind of off the top of the show. We got Nick Maximov, who's staying on the card here as a minus 150 favorite, $8,000 on DraftKings. But he's taking on Cody Brundage, who's taking this fight on short notice. Brundage was actually slated to fight on October 5th on Dana White Contender Series, I believe, which is an important thing to keep in mind when breaking down this fight. But this is a guy who fought William Knight on Contender Series, looked pretty solid for the first 2-3 minutes, and then just kind of ate some elbows against the cage, those Travis Brown elbows, and seriously hurt, got finished on the ground not soon thereafter, but did get a victory in his last fight over in LFA. A pretty entertaining fight. I think this is a good scrap. You know, Cody Brundage opened about plus 300 on offshore books yesterday afternoon with, low limits, like $200, $300 limits. And he got absolutely smashed. I was hoping that those prices would stick around a little bit longer when limits went up. Domestic books opened it, more offshore books opened it, but that price did not. I personally took some Brundage at plus 168 last night. I think this is going to be a competitive fight. I think Brundage has a chance to be a better version of Maximov. I'm not totally convinced of that. Maximov has fought at a higher weight class, seems to be a good grappler, obviously took that heavyweight fight on Contender Series. But to me, Brundage is, at the very worst, a slightly lesser version of Maximov. Of course, we have to keep consideration that he's taking the fight on 4 days' notice. Not exactly the easiest circumstances in the world. But as I mentioned, the kid was in camp. He's older than Nick Maximov. I think Maximov, honestly, I'll let you guys talk about his game a little bit more, but he seems to be a decent grappler to me. But if the fight is not on the ground, he's just someone who looks completely uncomfortable to me out there. And Cody Brundage isn't the best striker in the world, but I do kind of think he has a striking advantage in this fight. John, I'll go to you first on this fight. What do you make of Maximov versus Brundage here on 4 days' notice?
Yeah, I think I liked Maximov more in the Roberson matchup. I was kind of bummed to see Roberson pull out like he always does. And then we end up getting Cody Brundage, who, like you, I think is an okay prospect. Now we have literally a Dana White Contender Series fight. Like these guys were supposed to fight on Dana White Contender Series a couple seasons ago. Then Maximov was supposed to be on Ultimate Fighter this past season. Like that didn't work out either. And then now they're end up facing each other anyway. So this is one where, Maximov, I want to target him against guys that I know he's going to have a wrestling advantage, that I know he's going to have a grappling advantage. I'm not sure if he has that here. Like Maximov wrestled at Chico Community College. Cody Brundage comes from a D2 wrestling background. He wrestled at Newberry College, and he did fairly well there as well. Multiple time state champion in high school, or runner-up, I believe, one of those years in high school. But he's definitely got some decent wrestling. You mentioned the striking. He's got a powerful overhand right. Like on the feet, I think he's more likely to drop Maximov. And we've seen it multiple times where two guys that both have wrestling credentials, and everybody's like, oh, this is going to be a great wrestling match. And then it ends up being a boxing match because both guys kind of nullify each other's wrestling. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case here. And if it is, Cody Brundage is a live dog for sure. I didn't bet him myself. Like you said, if the big number plus 200 or higher stuck around on a book that I can get, then I would have bet him at plus 155, 168. It's okay. Like, I don't hate it, but I also I don't think, just coming in on short notice, I know he was supposed to fight on Contenders, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, in hindsight, this might be like, well, I should have just taken the plus 160 or whatever. But again, no play for me. But in terms of DraftKings, I know we'll touch on that more later, but I'm just always looking for leverage. And if Maximov is going to be chalky now because he's in the mid-range and he's priced as a sizable favorite and everybody's going to play him, and we think Brundage is a live dog, well, that just means we're going to be overweight to Brundage just for the leverage in general. So I think it's a good fight to target either way. But in terms of betting, I think I'm just going to wait and watch it play out, and hopefully Brundage comes through for you.
Yeah, I mean, undoubtedly a tough spot for Cody Brundage here. Evan, you mentioned that you thought Roberson versus Maximov provided one of the best money-making opportunities of the card. Do you feel similarly here with the late notice replacement? Any action on this fight?
Nah, I don't feel the same way here, just because Roberson is Kevin Holland, but slightly worse as a striker. I think is the best comparison. As far as this fight's concerned, I think right now it's pretty efficiently priced in the markets. So I don't have a play here, but I do. Once I do see a prop, because I haven't seen a prop yet for Brundage inside the distance or by knockout, something like that, I would actually be very willing to take that, because I think just from what I've seen, again, the grappling advantages I think is slightly in Brundage's favor. The striking slightly in his favor again there. This could be a situation where it could end like with a ground and pound knockout, right? Just like where the control time is just so much in favor of Brundage that it's just like he just starts striking and they just call the fight, whatever. And I'm willing to take those bets depending on the price. Like I'm just waiting for those markets to come out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense as a way to approach this fight. Something I'll mention about Maximov, like something I love, and I think we all would have loved against Roberson, is he's so willing to shoot the takedown, right? Like he fought Oscar Cota up a weight class at heavyweight on Contender Series, consistently shot takedowns, and granted against a much bigger man, but he also tends to lose positions. He got swept in that fight towards the end of the first round, if I remember correctly. So I don't think Maximov is totally like foolproof on the ground. I think he's likely a slightly better grappler than Brundage. I guess I'll disagree with you a little bit there, Evan. But I still think Brundage like really pieces him up on the feet. I think that Maximov is just kind of uncomfortable in the striking realm, and he's cutting to 185 for what I believe is the first time in his career. So that's also something to keep an eye on tomorrow morning. Let's move on, keep going down these prelims. We do have 13 fights to cover. We got Uros Medic. He's a minus 120 favorite, 8.4K on DraftKings against Jalin. The Tarantula Turner comes back an even money dog at plus 100, 7.8K for Turner. And I guess, Uros Medic is a guy who fought a Contender Series, someone I was not impressed with, came to the UFC, someone who I was not expecting to be impressed with. Won in, under 100 seconds, I believe it was, against Alon Cruz, and I still don't find myself that impressed with this guy. I'll kick it to you first, Evan, here in this spot. Kind of what do you make of Uros Medic as a prospect? We've only seen him under the UFC banner for less than a round between Contender Series and his debut, but 2 knockouts, and Jalin Turner's a guy who we've seen hurt on the feet before. What do you got for me here in Medic versus Turner?
Yeah, predicting Medic is very strange just because we have a very small sample size of 3 minutes and 52 seconds between his Contender Series fight and his UFC debut with Cruz. And he actually has more knockdowns in those 3 fights than he has absorbed strikes. Like he has 3 knockdowns and 2 absorbed strikes in that time frame. And it's like, I have a very hard time just looking at that film and being like, all right, he can be competitive with Jalin Turner. Jalin Turner, I think, is a very good fighter. He's a very live dog here. At plus 106, plus 105, depending on where you look. I think the striking, the power probably even, but I think over the long run, once we see more of Medic, I feel like Turner would be the better, more efficient striker. Definitely the better defender, strike avoider, strike defender. So I think Jalin Turner is a very live dog. I know, we're not going to talk fantasy too much, but people are going to play the Medic, the Medic knockout like heavily, just because of what we've seen in such a short sample size, and he's currently plus 150 inside the distance on 5 dimes. So like, I'm okay fading Medic in both in the betting market and the DFS market, and even in the betting market, I'm very much willing to go with Turner, possibly by decision. I think that might be his best path to victory, and it's going to provide a ton of value, probably like 5-1. So that's the bet I'd make in this fight.
Yeah. So John, I think you probably agree on the Jalin Turner point to some extent, but I know that you are rooting for violence in the spot. I saw a multi-unit play up in the FTM bets tracker from you, John. Talk to me about what you're on here in the Medic versus Turner, and I think you're rooting for some violence.
Yeah, I think this is a violent spot. I agree 100% on Medic. Like, if you're laying juice on Medic, like, that's pretty questionable. I think we can all agree there. Like, just based on the fact that we really don't know yet. Like, he fought on the Alaskan regional scene, so obviously he's going to run through the guys over there. Looked dangerous on Contender Series, but again, has yet to really be tested. At least Jalin Turner is a competent striker, like you said, probably the better grappler, I'd say, in this matchup. We haven't really seen Medic, even on the regional scene, grapple at all. So Jalin Turner is a purple belt, and he stayed alive against guys like Colin Potter, is a black belt. So it seems okay on the mat. But in terms of the matchup here, I think this is just a violent spot. So I actually bet fight doesn't start round 3 at plus 100, and that line's currently moved. I think it's like minus 110 in some spots now. I also bet, so that's a 2-unit play for me. I also bet fight doesn't start round 2 at plus 235. That's come down a little bit as well. But I think you still might be able to get plus 200 on that. But again, I just think this is really, really good look for a violent spot. I'm not really confident on either side because Medic, Yes, we have a lot of concerns and questions about him, but he does at least look pretty dangerous. Only been to the second round once in his 7-fight career. This is a guy who seems to be a front runner. And then if he is tested outside of the first round, we don't know what that cardio is going to look like. And again, we've already mentioned the defensive grappling question marks, the cardio question marks. There's so many things that can lead to a finish here. And then on the Turner side, like, he's been knocked out 3 times. We've seen him hurt on the feet. Both of these guys are very active. I think they're both going to move forward and trade. And it's just a stylistic matchup that I think really favors a finish here, whether it comes from Turner or Medic. I'm not really confident there. I don't hate an underdog shot on Turner, but I personally need more plus money on it. Like plus 105, probably not going to do it for me. Plus 130, plus 135 if Medic starts to get steamed here, then yeah, that'd probably be enough for me to take the shot there. But again, I think it's just a violence play. 2 units doesn't start round 3. 1 unit doesn't start round 2. So hopefully one of these guys get it done in the first round, and we can cash them both for the boys.
Fair enough. I took a shot on Jalin Turner on the money line. I believe I'm the first guy on the show to take an actual shot on the money line here. I bet him at plus 108 on FanDuel. That's still, fairly widely available across the market. Bet Rivers has a plus 108, but don't give them your money because they tried to limit me to $2 on betting Juan Soto for MVP earlier today. So instead, go bet it at MGM or DraftKings or anywhere else that has plus 105, plus 106. They get my referral. I like Turner in this spot. It's not a spot that I feel super confident in. I think as the chat is mentioning here, Mystic Sosa said, yeah, man, Turner has me worried with that chin. Jalin Turner to me doesn't necessarily scream someone who I want to be trusting in the long term, but I do think his skill set is there. And I actually think that he's a decently tough matchup for Uros Medic in this spot because, Evan mentioned Medic has a lot of power, and we have seen Turner hurt before, knocked out by Vicente Luque, obviously, who is a different caliber fighter, but Jalin Turner is someone who we've seen hurt on prior occasions. So I don't think that a Medic KO is totally out of the realm of possibilities, but I do think the grappling advantage here is pretty substantial for Turner. This is a guy who he averages less than a takedown per 15, so not someone who's going to go in there diving at legs necessarily, but he's very aggressive in terms of his submissions, almost 2 submission attempts per 15 minutes. And Uros Medic, he has 2 submissions to his name on the Alaskan regional scene, but if you go back and even look at those fights or watch those fights, they're both triangle chokes. And, to have a triangle choke, oftentimes you need to be in bottom position. And I don't think that anyone who's a favorite at the UFC should really ever be on the bottom in Alaska FC. Like, they just shouldn't be getting taken down. So those are kind of troubling signs for me. I don't know if Turner's going to go out there and wrestle. If I knew he was going to, I'd have more than a unit on him and a little more trust in him in this spot. But I just think he's a slightly better grappler in this spot, and I think we'll probably see that should the fight hit the ground. Last thing I want to touch on here is, Uros Medic, a lot of his offense in terms of the kickboxing comes from kicks. Like the Alon Cruz fight, I know he finished him with punches, but he's a heavily kicking-based offensive striker. And with Jalin Turner, we have someone who's absolutely massive at 155 pounds. He has a 6-inch reach advantage here, 2 inches of height, which is slightly less important and less impressive. But if we think about kicking range, it's hard to outkick a guy when you have a 6-foot reach disadvantage here for Medic. There's going to be 6 inches where Medic likely cannot kick Turner, and Turner is someone who has extremely long limbs given the reach here, just kind of compared to his height. Like, I think it's going to be difficult for Medic to get into kicking range against someone who can kind of outkick him. And should he close the distance too much, I think that Turner has the much better boxing here. I don't know if he has the better striking, but I do think he's a better boxer. His hands are just a little bit more fluid. We haven't seen a ton of Medic's hands, but I think that Turner's boxing in close quarters, kind of in the pocket, is where his striking advantage will come into play. So it sounds like the boys are kind of on a little bit of Jalin Turner here, a little bit of violence for Jon. Certainly looking forward to that matchup. Hopefully the Uros Medic fade comes in sooner rather than later, because I got a feeling I'm just going to keep going back to it until it works out. All right, let's move on to our 5th fight of the night. We got Taila Santos, minus 455 here. I believe she's the 3rd biggest favorite on the card, $9,300 on DraftKings against Roxy Modafferi. Comes back, Roxy plus 355, a nice $6,900 on DraftKings. And Jon, I will let you go first here because I know that you are adamantly against any sort of Roxanne Modafferi bet this weekend. As you explained to me earlier in the week, talk to me about this fight. I know you're going to pick Santos, but I'm kind of curious. What do you think of her in terms of DK? Like, she's $9,300. Certainly doesn't seem, in my opinion, to have the upside of a Semelsberger or Shevchenko in that price range, but certainly someone we need to be talking about prior to the weekend.
Yeah, I know a lot of people are taking a shot on Roxy here, but I can't get on board personally. I want to target Roxy in a couple, only if a couple things line up, right? Like she has to be a big underdog. Okay, she checks that box, but any other box, she doesn't really check for me. Like she needs to have some sort of wrestling advantage. I don't think she does here. Like I know she averages like just under 2 takedowns per 15, but they're against mostly people that she's able to outmuscle or people that just can't defend takedowns whatsoever. And I don't think Santos fits either of those two. Like I know a lot of people are going to refer to Santos in her debut against Mara Romero Barella. And that was a big reason why I tried to fade her with Molly McCann, which didn't work out. But we saw in the McCann fight and her most recent fight against Jillian Robertson, we saw the improvements. I think there was also a reason for why she looked so bad against Barella, which I can't remember because I didn't go back and look it up in her debut. But I just thought she looked much, much better in her most recent 2 fights. And she's such a physically strong girl that I don't think Modafferi really has any chance to take her down in this fight. I actually think Santos could land takedowns if she wanted to. And I don't know if she will because Roxy's probably a better grappler. But again, like I say it all the time, like in low-level women's MMA and just women's MMA in general, physicality and strength play a lot more than they do in the male division. Like those are just facts. And I think Santos is going to be a much more physical and a much more stronger fighter here. And I don't think Roxy's going to be able to muscle her to the ground. And on the feet, I think Santos is a lot more powerful, maybe not as technical of a striker. We've seen Roxy's boxing improve a little bit in some of her recent fights, but again, I mean, should Santos be a minus 425 favorite? Probably not. But again, I'm not rushing to the window to bet Roxanne Modafferi. And to answer your question in terms of DraftKings, I just favor all the other expensive fighters in her range. Like, I don't think she's a bad play because maybe she mixes in takedowns or maybe she can get a finish. But on such a full slate where we have expensive options that are safe and that have a high floor and ceiling, she's not going to be much of a play for me.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I might make a case for Roxy later on the show, but I want to go to Evan first here. John kind of mentioned, Santos is probably not necessarily fading Santos, but it's more so the options around her on DraftKings are so much more enticing. But on the other hand, a lot of the field might feel similarly. Do you think this is a solid spot for leverage in DK, or are you kind of comfortable fading Santos in DK and maybe even the betting market as well? Are you on my side here, Evan? Are we betting Roxy? Are we taking the plunge?
So I'll hit the DFS part first because it's kind of short and sweet. I'm not really going Santos or Roxy in DFS because I don't think Santos is going to put up enough volume for me to want to do that. She's only attempting 6 strikes per minute, and she's attempting 3 takedowns per 15. And I mean, those aren't the things that I want to really target at her DK price, right? And Roxy, I'm not really going there either. As far as the betting market is concerned, my betting model actually shows value on Roxanne Modafferi. Very slight, but still shows value. I have her just under like 27% chance of winning the fight. And I think a lot of it just comes from the 2-fight sample size in which we've seen this improvement in Santos's takedown defense. For example, from the Bello fight, it might not be completely stable. Like, we don't know in a 2-fight sample size if that's stable enough to go. And we know that Roxanne is very strong on the ground. If Roxy does get taken down, she's kind of screwed because Taila does have 50% fight control time in her UFC time so far, so that's also a concern. But if Roxy does get this to the ground and she does maintain control, I mean, she can do that. That's within her range of outcomes in this fight. Just because we don't know for sure if Santos's takedown defense is as improved as maybe it might have seen. It might be, but I'm willing to take a gamble that it might not be. And what we can possibly see from Roxanne, and I see her at 325 right now. So I'm willing to lay that just as maybe like a half unit to a unit right now.
I think that's fair enough. I'm likely going to bet a half unit on Roxy. I think probably more Santos money comes in. Pay-per-view event in Vegas, we might see her kind of added to those parlays, get Roxy up into that plus 400 range. I'll take a half unit shot. My breakdown for this fight is, look, I've been pretty impressed with Santos. I think, John, you made some really great points regarding her physicality, right? Like, that's something that is inherently more important in lower weight class women's MMA. And that's something that we have to keep in mind here. I will say that I think she was kind of, gifted those top positions against Jillian Robertson, and she did a decent job staying on top. But Jillian was like pulling guard from all different sorts of angles in that fight. And that's something that I'm not sure that Roxy will kind of end up on bottom for as long as Jillian did. The path to victory for Roxy is, I don't think it's necessarily hard to decipher, but it's very narrow in terms of, I think she has a chance to win the fight. I think she probably has a better chance to win than the betting odds indicate, which is why I'm going to bet her. But for Roxy to win the fight, she's going to have to land takedowns, and probably from like the same body lock position over and over again that she goes to. Like, I really think she has like one takedown to win the fight. But something I will say about Roxanne is, Evan, you mentioned 50% control time for Taila in fights when she's on top, and she has looked good there. But at the same time, she was mostly facing submission attempts from Jillian Robertson. Roxanne Modafferi is someone who, when she's on bottom, she's looking to sweep and get back on top, which is something that I feel like I kind of overlook sometimes when looking into the numbers, control times, stuff like that. The Macy Barber fight, I know there's some controversy surrounding it, but Roxy was on bottom there against a girl who's pretty physically intimidating for this weight class, and was able to get butterfly hooks and then sweep her way to the top in that fight. I think that that's something live in this fight. I'll have a little bit of Roxy at 6.9K, I guess. I mean, how could you pass on Roxy at 6.9K? So I'll have a little bit there. I might take the half unit shot come Saturday morning, but not necessarily somewhere I'm looking to plant my flag. But I do think that this line could be inflated. You talked about stabilizing data, Evan, and it's just one of those things. The Barella fight is so alarming, and there were some circumstances regarding that fight, John, that you mentioned, and I didn't have a chance to look them up either, but basically just UFC debut, potentially just octagon jitters, that sort of thing, which aren't super predictive in general, but she clearly looks like a different fighter afterwards. But I just can't get that image out of my mind of, her with the just tossing up submissions off her back. I believe she was controlled for like over a round of that fight. So there's a part in the back of my brain that just can't really let go of that prior. And, if Roxy Modafferi is going to beat you in one component of the game, it's likely going to be grappling. So we've already spent way too much time for me to be talking about the half unit I'm going to lose on Saturday. Let's move on to our next prelim. And these next three prelims before we head to the main card are really solid fights. I give the UFC a lot of shit on Twitter for Contender Series and some of the main events we have coming up, although I believe the Miesha Tate versus Ketlin Vieira main event is canceled, which we can all celebrate. But I will say this card is absolutely stacked. Like, these next three prelims are super high level fights. I'm excited to break them down with you guys. First up at heavyweight, we got Chris Daukaus minus 205, $8,800 on DK against Shamil Abdurakhimov, who comes back here plus 175, 7.4K for Shamil, coming off of a decent layoff here at heavyweight. Evan, we'll let you go first here. Chris Daukaus, 3 UFC fights, 3 first-round knockouts. Certainly has been impressive to this point, but undoubtedly a step up in competition here against Shamil, who hasn't been active recently, but is someone who had a pretty decent UFC run when he was. Wins over Marcin Tybura, Walt Harris, Andrei Arlovsky. What do you make of this fight at heavyweight? We got a minus 200 favorite here for Daukaus. Is that recency bias, or do you kind of think he goes out there and continues his streak against Shamil?
I think that line is based on a number of things, right? I mean, Daukaus, we've seen him more recently. His knockouts have been more impressive, just from the visual aspect. But I really don't want to lay minus 200 chalk on a heavyweight fight, especially when the other side is so live for a knockout. You have to remember, like with Shamil, it's like he doesn't throw a ton of volume, right? He attempts 5.3 strikes per minute. And he actually gets outstruck by a little bit at distance, like by a third of a strike per minute. But he also has grappling in the tank as something that in his tool bag. And he also has those powerful knockout shots. I mean, he's knocked out some pretty good names. So I'm actually very willing to bet Shamil. I have him as a slight, again, like a half unit play. Same thing with Roxy. Because I have him at like a 40% chance of winning this fight. And the market currently being at 170. I think Shamil is a very strong bet to make. I haven't seen his props. I just haven't looked at he probably is very good inside the distance props currently that are worth betting on. But yeah, I mean, Shamil, I think he's 175 at BetMGM right now. That's the best line you can get. And I definitely have that for a unit.
Awesome. Yeah. So Shamil inside the distance is plus 325. And Evan, you mentioned, not wanting to lay a minus 200 price on Chris Daukaus here, who is the brother of Kyle, as mentioned by Mystic Sosa in the chat. But John, I think you have a way of trying to bet Chris Daukaus in this fight that isn't laying chalk, but instead getting a plus number. Talk to me about how you're approaching this fight. Because honestly, I don't think you think something totally different than Evan, but it's just a different way to approach the betting market, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, I would not be laying chalk on Daukaus here at minus 200. I know some people think like Daukaus is all hype. I disagree with that. But I do think I just don't want to be laying chalk at heavyweight in high variance matchups in general, like Evan alluded to. But I think if you are targeting Daukaus like I am, the way to do it is by first round knockout. So I bet him by first round knockout for a unit at plus 370. You mentioned every fight in the UFC, he's won by first round knockout, but also that's his MO. Like 10 of his 11 wins in his career have come by knockout, 8 of which have come inside the first round. Like, that's how he wins. He's very aggressive. He's very fast for the weight class. He's obviously got the power, but it's the speed advantage that he's shown, especially over these slower, less mobile heavyweights like Alexei Oleinik and guys like that. Like, that's a similar matchup to me as Abdurakhimov I can never say his name. Shamil. We're gonna go with Shamil. Yeah. Shamil is coming off the two-year layoff since getting knocked out by Curtis Blaydes. He's been knocked out 3 times in his career, so the durability is a bit of a question mark. He's 40 years old now. Like, he's going to be much slower. Daukaus is going to have the speed advantage, like I mentioned. So I think if you're targeting Daukaus like I am, I think the first round knockout is the way he does it, and I think it's actually pretty likely here. So plus 370 is a decent number, and that's the way I played it for a unit over at FanDuel Sportsbook.
Yeah, so personally, I've been on the fence with this fight kind of throughout the week, and I was hoping you guys would kind of figure out, help me figure out how I want to approach betting this fight, and you pretty much did the opposite. We got Evan on Shamil money line, which is what I was considering, and then we got Jon on Daukaus by knockout, which is kind of what's holding me back from making the bet. So solid cases made by both of you. In my opinion, if this was a prime Shamil, I think this is a shot you're definitely taking, right? Like Chris Daukaus, John, you mentioned all the first round knockouts, which is great. But at the same time, all of his losses have come out, or last 2 of his losses, I should say, have come outside of the first round. When he gets extended, it has not looked great historically. I will agree that I think his speed is probably his best asset at heavyweight, and really something that not a ton of guys bring at heavyweight, right? Like Cyril Gane throws a jab and has decent footwork at heavyweight, and it's like a complete revelation for the division. Like, we've never seen a guy like Cyril Gane, and he really does things that are like extremely basic at other weight classes, which is just to say that I don't think that Daukaus is Cyril Gane 2.0, but just having the ability to throw a fast 1-2, have a little bit of footwork at heavyweight goes a long way. Heavyweight's just kind of this weird division that we have to measure on a different scale than what we measure other divisions at. So look, I think Daukaus has a speed advantage early in this fight. Shamil is 40 years old. He hasn't fought in what will be a little bit over 2 years, like 25 months come Saturday. I'm curious what he looks like at the weigh-ins tomorrow. One thing I want to mention is, Daukaus is not a big heavyweight to begin with, and he looks, super slim, kind of on Instagram. The pictures that have surfaced of him throughout fight week. He weighed in against Alexei Oleinik at 234. I think there's a chance he comes in less than that tomorrow morning, which is Friday for the weigh-ins. And I think there's a chance, Shamil could be up near the heavyweight limit. If we're betting on a grappler at a heavyweight fight, it's nice to have a 30, 40 pound weight advantage. I do think that's something that's kind of working in the favor of Shamil come this weekend. So all that to say, no action for me quite yet. But if I do bet aside, I think Shamil money line is the way to go. But I certainly am not going to be overlooking Chris Daukaus on DK because of that knockout equity that John touched on. Let's move on to a fight that I think we're all happy is going to end up happening, or so it looks like. Fingers crossed tomorrow morning that Dan Hooker and Nasrat Haqparast both make weight, or whatever they agree to, both get to the scale, both get to the octagon Saturday night. This is a fight that seemed like it was, in doubt for a little bit with Dan Hooker having visa issues, and then Nasrat had some visa issues as well. Both fighters are in Vegas as we speak, or Dan Hooker's arriving within the next few hours. And this is an interesting matchup. 2 strikers here who have had completely different strength of schedule, but kind of completely different end results recently. We got Dan Hooker minus 145, 8.7K on DraftKings, a guy who's fought the best in the world. He's fought Dustin Poirier as recently as this year, Mike Chandler, contender for the title this year. And then Nasrat, on the other hand, hasn't really fought anyone decent. I think the best fighter he's fought was Drew Dober, and we didn't learn much there in that fight besides Drew Dober's a G and knocked him out inside of the first minute. Nasrat's plus 125, 7.5K, but clearly someone that the market is high on considering the strength of schedule discrepancies here. And someone, John, that I think you're high on. I'm going to let you go first here again because I know you have a bet up in the FDM bets tracker on Nasrat in this spot. Tell me what you kind of make of the spot. Is it based on Hooker's travel? Do you see something in the styles between these two guys? Talk to me about what you got.
Yeah, it's definitely not based on Hooker's travel. I saw some people talking about that, but like Nasrat probably had it worse, like with the whole visa thing. So, and then having to cut weight flying into Vegas on Thursday. Like I try not to put too much weight into stuff like that. Like, of course it matters, but there's really, as a numbers guy, Evan can attest to, there's really no way to quantify that. So I'm just not even gonna really factor it in at all. You know, I'm looking at the stylistic matchup and the skill set of both the fighters inside the octagon. And that's where I can't really justify Dan Hooker being a minus 175 favorite. I know it's come down since then, but I bet Nasrat at plus 144 early in the week. I know other people got a slightly better number. So if you jumped on him early, I think that was the right move. I probably would stay away where it's at now at plus 125, but I do think Nasrat's the side here. Like, and when it comes to the matchup, like Nasrat's a high volume boxer. He's got good hands, fast hands and power. And yes, he's probably a one-dimensional boxer because he doesn't really mix in the kicks, doesn't really look to grapple as much. But Dan Hooker, there's a lot of things that concern me with Hooker. Like, yes, of course, he's a good striker, a more diverse striker. He's going to mix in the kicks. He's got some nice knees in the clinch as well. Like, I favor him to just be more well-rounded in terms of his striking attack, but it's the defense that concerns me. Like, Dan Hooker does not block strikes. Like, he blocks strikes with his face. He does not move his head off the center line. And during those pocket exchanges, we see him get clipped repeatedly. If he does that against Nasrat Haqparast, I think he's probably getting knocked out. Dan Hooker's a guy who's historically been very durable throughout his career, but the level of damage that he's taken in his most recent fights, he went life or death with Paul Felder, he went life or death with Dustin Poirier, and then he goes out against Michael Chandler after talking about retirement, and he gets knocked out in the very first strike that Chandler threw. And then he was talking about retirement, talked about like boxing Jake Paul, other stuff like that. Like, I don't think his head's in it anymore. I think he's taken a lot of damage over the past couple fights. And I just think this is a bad matchup for a guy who does not defend strikes well, and he defend punches well. And that's exactly what Nasrat is going to look to do. That's all he does is punch. So I just think there's going to be a lot of striking exchanges here. And I think Hooker's going to eat a lot of heavy punches clean to the face. So I'm okay with taking the underdog in that scenario, who I think might be at a slight cardio disadvantage, but I trust his durability and I trust his defense a little bit more, along with his speed and power in terms of the striking.
Yeah, I guess we'll call you CLV Kelly this week with the 21 cents beating the line so far as of Thursday night. Evan, we'll go to you next. You know, this is a spot where we were talking about stuff like travel being hard to quantify. Stuff like someone's chin and ability to take a punch is hard to quantify, but I think it's pretty obvious to anyone who's watched Dan Hooker fight that this is a guy who historically has relied on that chin and has taken a lot of damage recently. How does that factor into how you cap this fight?
Yeah, I mean, so right now, as the line currently stands, like I had value on Nasrat. I took it at 140 when I did. Nasrat is kind of a statistical anomaly in that he is a striker that engages with his opponents, yet he has a very high strike defense percentage of a very nice 69%. Right, but yeah, I mean he's kind of an outlier in that being so good at strike avoidance, even though he has fought against guys who are willing to engage with him. So I'm willing to take that within his entire UFC sample and transfer to this Dan Hooker fight where, yes, the strength of schedule clearly favors Dan Hooker, but that's not really something that, like, it matters, but it doesn't matter as much as maybe the market might think, just over the long run. So yeah, I take Nasrat here just because the striking is basically even between the two when you look at all the other striking stats. And Nasrat actually does have a slight better differential at distance. So I would take him as the side as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense in a striking fight. If you favor a guy as a striker, I think making a bet on him at plus 140 makes a lot of sense. Sounds like both of you guys got in early on Nasrat. Hopefully, the subscribers at ftmbets.com also saw when John posted that on the site as well. I guess I'll kind of play devil's advocate here, and I'll take Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker's my play in this fight. I haven't bet him yet. I'm not sure I'm going to bet him. A lot of kind of I don't know what you would call it. I guess we should call it. There's been a lot of fight week shenanigans going on with both guys, stuff that's hard to quantify in general. Something that I think is interesting here is not only is Nasrat kind of a statistical anomaly in the fact that he defends strikes so well despite going forward a good amount. He's kind of an anomaly in that his strength of schedule, which, Evan, I know you mentioned you don't think it's as important as the market is, and that may be true, but it's still something, obviously, that we're all looking at. It's kind of interesting with Nasrat. He has gone from fighting like Marcin Held, who has had a good run in PFL. Drew Dober are his two losses. Drew Dober is perennial top 15 guy, especially in a pure striking fight. Those are two guys who, those are not bad losses at all, right? And those are his only losses in the UFC. Then you go to the wins, and it's like Mark Diakise is probably his best win, but the market doesn't even really like Mark Diakise in general. Maybe Rafa Garcia is someone who the market liked, but then he went out there and lost as a minus 300 favorite his last time out. There's just no one really even remotely close to Dan Hooker that Nasrat has fought in general, but also that he's beaten, which I think is an interesting scenario here. It's impossible to ignore the fact that Dan Hooker is someone who, in that Edson Barbosa fight, is someone who has relied, the Paul Felder fight, has relied on his toughness, his heart to get him through fights. And that can only take you so far when you take so many head strikes that, your brain just can't keep up with the way your body and your mental toughness can. His chin might let him down in this spot, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I haven't bet it yet. I do think that Hooker is a side. It's just hard for me, right? Like Nasrat, very boxing heavy, southpaw guy. Dan Hooker looked incredible against Dustin Poirier. He's the best southpaw boxer in this weight class, one of the best in the UFC. It's just so hard for me to pick against Dan Hooker when we saw what he did to Dustin Poirier through 2 rounds. And like Nasrat Haqparast is someone who might have upside in the division long term. But in terms of like being compared to Dustin Poirier currently, it's just really hard for me to see a guy in Dan Hooker who looks so good against this style fighter at the very elite level to kind of come down against Nasrat, who is someone I respect, but hasn't proven to me to be much less top 3, maybe not even top 15. So all that to say, I'll pick Dan Hooker. I think it's a tough spot to put your money on. Props to you guys for getting in at plus 145. At current market, it's a pass for me, but I'll be rooting for the Hangman, one of my favorite fighters, fighting out in New Zealand this weekend. Let's move on to our final prelim of the night. We got Merab Dvalishvili minus 255, $8,900 on Draftkings against former title challenger Marlon Moraes plus 215 for Marlon, $7,300 on Draftkings. And we talk about recency bias on this show. I won't really bite the bullet here. Evan, I'll let you go first. I don't think a lot of people thought that Marlon Moraes would be a plus 215 underdog to Merab 2 or 3 years ago, but here we are. The market seems to like Merab. He's taking money throughout fight week. What do you kind of make of this spot for Merab as a big favorite and what figures to be the toughest test of his career? You want to talk about a step up in strength of schedule. This is a massive step up for Merab. What do you make of his chances in this fight? It's a pretty large favorite against Marlon Moraes.
Yeah, I've had a really difficult time handicapping this fight just because, I mean, the price, obviously, spend it or paying, 265, 250, whatever number you're getting. It's really hard to back him as a minus, 200 plus favorite just because, yes, obviously he has the serial grappling that he's known for. He has probably one of the best cardio in the UFC in general, right? At least in my opinion. But with Moraes, it's like the two fighters in his UFC career who have taken him down, Dodson and Henry Cejudo. I mean, like they hardly Henry Cejudo took him down once in 4 attempts, in a little under 15 minutes, right? And John Dodson took him down twice in a 15-minute fight. Like it's really hard to take him down, and I'm not sure if I trust the striking because. And the market, when it comes to looking at Merab's striking numbers, I don't think they're looking at the distance striking, I think they're just looking at his, the first thing you see on the UFC stats page, which is like his total, everything encompassed. Which, I mean, that does give Merab a striking advantage, or a positive striking differential, like 2 strikes per minute. But that doesn't mean anything when all of his striking advantage is coming on the ground. And we don't know if he can get this to the ground like as often as we think he's going to. Right? I mean, even if he does get this to the ground, it's like Moraes has been controlled for less than 5% of his total UFC fight time, too. So it's like, I want to say Merab is going to win because I'm just a fan of Merab. I like the banter between him, Aljamain Sterling and Petr Yan going on currently. But I just have a hard time backing him. Like I can understand it for DFS because even in a loss, Merab can score high based on his fight style. But just in the betting market in general, like I have to pass on this line, unfortunately. I'll root for him. I'll root for him for sure, but I don't think I can make a bet here.
Yeah, you mentioned it. I think Merab scored 99 points before in a DK loss to Frankie Saenz way back in the day.
Yeah.
It certainly has kind of insane upside as far as that goes. I'll go quickly here in the middle on this fight. So I got down on Merab at like minus 125 when offshore books opened it at low limits. Obviously, I didn't track that. Just kind of a personal bet that I got down a little under 2 units on. The limits weren't super high at that point. Clearly a lot of value. It's moved to minus 255. I don't have to tell anyone that. I did track a bet this week on Merab. Full disclosure, I didn't bet him at this price, but I do still think there's value at minus 225. I didn't add to my personal position because I'm already invested. But over at FoxBet, Evan, you mentioned, Merab is the best cardio in the UFC in your opinion. I don't really think that's that controversial of a take. Maybe I'll try to one-up you here. Like, I think Marlon Moraes might have the worst cardio in the UFC. And it's crazy kind of the discrepancy here between these two guys where you mentioned like Marlon is not easy to take down, but Merab is going to try so many times. Like he's just going to go for takedowns over and over again. When he beat John Dodson and he took him down 2 times, he attempted 20 takedowns in that fight. I just think the act of just kind of getting pushed against the cage and having to defend takedowns for Marlon is going to be to the point where he's not going to be able to do it for too long. So while at the beginning of the fight, I could see him having success kind of keeping this fight on the feet, I just think the pace of Merab gets to him as time wears on. And I think Merab kind of covers this price down the stretch of this fight. John, I want to kick it to you here. And something that I found interesting throughout this week is, a lot of people, the general consensus of this fight, and maybe you feel differently, is, Marlon needs to win the fight likely by knockout in the first 5 to 7 minutes. At least that's how I feel about the fight. But then you come see props, come out. I see upwards of a 10-1 currently on DraftKings for Marlon Moraes to win in round 1. To me, and maybe conventional wisdom, like I think that's his best path to victory. Certainly a big number here. Any interest, from you in the prop market on backing Marlon, or do you just kind of think Merab does him however he wants?
No, I'm glad you brought that up. I wonder what FanDuel has because they're usually behind market. If they have more than 10-1, I think that's probably an easy hedge. Just because it's like if Marlon wins, it probably does come by first round knockout for multiple reasons. One, we know his cardio typically does not hold up for more than 5 to 7 minutes, like you mentioned. And 2, Merab is another guy who does not play much defense on the feet. In terms of the striking, he gets hit a lot in the face. And I know he's been pretty durable, and he'll just like do that thing where he just does a bobblehead and shakes it off and then continues to move forward and shoot takedowns. But I mean, it's kind of sketchy against a good striker like Marlon Moraes while he does have cardio. So I think if you can bet Moraes at more than 10-1 by knockout in the first round, then I think that's an easy hedge if you're holding Merab money line tickets. Or the way that I backed this fight, because I missed the early opener on Merab, was a prop on Merab Dvalishvili to win by KO or decision at minus 135. I think that pretty much captures all of his win condition, and you're getting half of the current money line. So I think that's the way to bet Merab, just because he's not a submission guy. Like, he has one career submission in his entire career, and it came by armbar. And when while he does land a bunch of takedowns, he doesn't have good control time because he's typically, looking to land ground and pound. his opponents are able sometimes to just power back to their feet. Like, he doesn't hold them down long enough to even hunt for submissions, which he doesn't really look to do in general. So I think betting him by knockout or decision, they call it double chance on FanDuel. That's the way to do it. -135. I think that's even still available on FanDuel. So I don't know why they haven't moved that yet. I think there's a good bit of value there. But if you're feeling kind of sketched out, like Mystic said in the chat, like a lot of people, the parlay boys are parlaying Merab. Like, if you're feeling that way, I think you can still bet Merab, like by KO or decision -135, but also, take a quarter unit or so and put it on Moraes by first round knockout. And I think you probably don't even really need to sweat it much.
Yeah. So that price, just quick housekeeping here, -135 still exists on the KO decision prop. And I see on FanDuel Sportsbook, Evans in Marlon KO in round 1, 12-1 on FanDuel Sportsbook. If you're the type to try to kind of hedge your props, I think that is a decent way to do so. John, it sounds like you, or looks like you are enticed by that.
I said if it's more than 10-1, like FanDuel, we know is always behind market. So it does not surprise me to see them 12-1. That is, that's definitely tempting there.
Yeah, I think if you're playing Marlon, that's the way to do it. I don't know. I bet Merab money line at -225, -255. I put this in the Discord, free Discord, ftnbets.com. Just go hit chat up in the top toolbar. You can get in the Discord. John and I are chopping it up in terms of betting markets, daily fantasy, all that stuff. I put in the chat, at -255, I think that prop is the way to play it. -225, I kind of mapped it out. I think the plays were very similar in terms of edge, but kind of where the market is at now with Merab, I would prefer to play that prop as well in the current market. All right, we've been going for just over an hour, 13 fights, 3-man booth. We've got a lot to say. Let's move on to the main card here for UFC 266. We got 5 fights, including 3 5-round fights, the main event, co-main event, and featured bout between Robbie Lawler and Nick Diaz. But before we could talk about those 3, we're going to kick it off. In the women's division, we got Jessica Andrade, -250 favorite to Cynthia Calvillo, comes back, +210 for Calvillo, 7.2K. Andrade is 9,000 flat. And boys, off the top, I mentioned to you before we went live on air, like, look, we got 13 fights, a 3-man booth. If there's a fight you don't feel strongly about, don't worry about not taking up too much time. Like, feel free to just kind of pass on it. And that's what I'm going to choose to do here. I think Andrade is the better fighter than Cynthia in pretty much every aspect of the fight game, but -250 to me feels like an accurate price. I wouldn't be surprised if Cynthia landed a takedown or two, but the way she struggled with Chookagian in the grappling game, and I know Andrade got dominated by Valentina, but she got up once or twice from takedowns. She's super strong, stronger than Cynthia, I would think, in terms of physicality. I think this fight is priced pretty accurately. Nothing for me here. Evan, I'll let you go first on the pay-per-view opener between Andrade and Calvillo.
So Cynthia Calvillo, I'll just be straight up before I start getting into my ranting. Calvillo is one of my larger bets of the night. I find a ton of value on her because she is +225 on FanDuel currently, and she hasn't moved since I bet her at that number. I think so. So I give her like a 46% chance of winning. The reasoning for that mainly has to do with probably how my model interprets the grappling exchanges, the potential grappling exchanges in this fight. Calvillo will attempt more, and that normally, increases win probability. She attempts like half a takedown more per 15 minutes. The takedown defense is better from Cynthia Calvillo. She's been defending 95.5% of all takedown attempts against her in her last 5 fights. And the overall striking differential, which I think is important here because both will try to grapple. Jessica Andrade's, and obviously she has a different strength of schedule, and this does affect it, just for the grain of salt there. So Andrade's striking differential in her last 5 fights is -12.41. Whereas for Calvillo, it's +0.92. And finally, to top it all off, the strike defense is actually a lot better on Calvillo's part at 68% versus 45.4% for Andrade. So really, Andrade again she still should be priced as the favorite, but that +225 price makes absolutely no sense given the ground striking advantage that Calvillo should have, and the possibly slight grappling advantage that she'll have.
I think that's our hottest take of the show so far. So we got Evan big here on Cynthia Calvillo plus 225. I'm passing it. John, are you going to complete the trifecta here? I passed. Evan's on Cynthia. Any Jessica Andrade money from your end this week, or what do you think about this fight pay-per-view kickoff?
Yeah, I almost bet her at plus 250 to win by knockout, but didn't end up doing it. I got a lot of props out there this week. I do think there's an edge there, but probably not enough for me to bet it on a full betting card. Like I think I have like 9 units out there, which is a lot for me, you know. And I'm not one of those guys that are like, yeah, put 15 units on Surreal Gone money line.
That's like me this week. I have like
super
15 units on the line. I think it might be my most.
No. But I was saying on one fight. Though.
No, I know. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
In general, I have a lot of volume, but yeah, back to Andrade.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good betting card. Like there's so many spots. We mentioned a couple money line spots. I think the prop market is great this week. That's where I put most of my money. But yeah, I mean, I get taking a shot here with Calvillo. I'm not doing it, but I get the reasoning behind it. The problem is if she can't land the takedowns, I think she gets absolutely murked on the feet by Jessica Andrade. And obviously, like, you're getting a good number on it. So it's like, well, if she can land the takedowns, then, you know, this fight plays out a lot closer than minus 265 would indicate. But I'm just not confident she's going to be able to do that. You know, the level of competition is a pretty big deal here. Like, she's able to have wrestling and grappling advantages against people like Courtney Casey and some of the other people that she's fought. Like, Jessica Andrade is one of the most powerful, physically strong girls, regardless whether it's flyweight or strawweight. And now, like, I don't know if Cynthia is going to be able to take her down. And I think on the feet, Andrade is just going to be much more powerful. And just watching her struggle against Chikagian in the wrestling and stuff, like it makes it tough for me to think that she's going to be able to take down Andrade probably multiple times. I think she'll need to take her down multiple times to win this fight. And I don't even know if she can take her down once. So that's why I would pass on it. I think Andrade probably wins by knockout. Like I said, plus 250, I think I saw on FanDuel. Wasn't a bad look, but overall, no action for me in terms of the betting market. And Prodigy says he's on the Andrade side as well.
Look, Evan, I respect your take here with Cynthia. Cynthia's the one I've been high on in the past, higher than the market. Glorious cash against Jessica I, my personal nemesis, and then a disastrous loss against Caitlin Chookagian, both of which I bet on Cynthia Calvillo in those spots. I just think for me personally, the reason I'm picking Andrade, I know I said I would take the breakdown here, but I just think the power is kind of something that's like the great equalizer here. And we know you mentioned the stats, Evan. I love that you brought those out with kind of the way Cynthia attempts strikes. I just fear that like she gets hit once by Andrade, and it's one of those things where she's like, man, maybe I don't want to attempt this many strikes anymore. And Andrade, I mean, it's clearly a step down for Andrade compared to who she's been fighting. But I think a plus 215, like if I had to bet the money line, I'm siding with Evan here, but no action for me on the pay-per-view opener. Let's move on to our second fight of the main card. We got a heavyweight bout between Curtis Blaydes. Speaking of painful losses, I mean, Max bet Curtis Blaydes against Derek Lewis. Painful loss there. Yet again, priced big favorite here, minus 315, 9.2K on DraftKings, which I think might be sneaky. We've got guy Merab, the DraftKings scoring golden boy. We got minus 1,500 favorite in Valentina Shevchenko, and sandwiched right between them is good old Curtis Blaydes, the guy who averages over 100 DK points per win. He's at 9.2K. Opponent here, Jairzinho Rosenstrike, coming off of a buzzer beater KO, plus 265, 7K for Biggie Boy on DraftKings. I'll go first here. Only bet I made on the fight, and I actually think it was a pretty big edge at the time. It's kind of dried up since, was the fight not to go the distance at minus 172. You look at these two guys as UFC's bodies of work. Fights that have ended inside of 3 rounds for these guys occurs at like a 72.5% clip, which is obviously higher than what a minus 170 would indicate. Put on top of that, the fact that, you know, Curtis Blaydes got knocked out in that disastrous fashion his last time out. I think it's hard to know whether that'll like affect his durability per se, but if there's something I do think it'll affect, you know, there's a good chance that like he can't take a punch as well as he used to. And he's a guy who has certainly, you know, been hurt before with Curtis Blaydes. I have talked historically about how I think Curtis Blaydes is the best heavyweight in the world. I'm not sure I still think that with the emergence of Cyril Gane, but Curtis Blaydes is someone I'm high on, but he has always kind of been able to get hit at heavyweight, which is obviously something you want to avoid. But something that I think helps the under here is he knows the dangers that lie at heavyweight now, because he was dominating Derek Lewis in that fight on the feet, and he even had him hurt at points. I would hope Curtis Blaydes learns, like, heavyweight, you need to have some sort of finishing upside. Like, you need to get your opponent out of there, because you could be winning a fight 10-8 and then winning the second round. And I'm not saying that's necessarily what happened, but one punch from the guy like whose nickname is literally Biggie Boy has a chance to change the fight. And obviously everyone knows that. Everyone knows that Jairzinho Rozenstruik needs a big shot to win in this fight by KO. But I think the fact that Blaydes knows that he can't fuck around, right? Like, you can't just dominate guys at heavyweight and not put them away, because eventually it will come back to bite you. And I think that it's going to lead to him being more aggressive. We haven't seen Jairzinho Rozenstruik. I went back and watched some tape against in the Overeem fight. I can't even remember him ever really getting up off his back. Like, I think Curtis Blaydes is going to sit him down and just completely pound him out with a KO win. And at the same time, betting inside the distance covers pretty much what I would consider 98, 99% Jairzinho Rozenstruik's win equity. So I'm on the inside the distance here. I like violence between the heavyweights on the main card. John, what do you got for me in Blaydes versus Rozenstruik?
Yeah, I think you broke it down pretty well. I don't really have a ton to add. We know the game plan from Curtis Blaydes, similar to Merab. Like, it's the same thing, right? Like, he's going to close distance, he's going to land takedowns, and he's just got much better control. He's going to control his opponent for the duration of the fight, maybe finish the fight by ground and pound. I know Prodigy said in the chat he bet the knockout prop. I don't hate that. I think a ground and pound finish is within the cards here. The problem, the concern with Blaydes is always the concern with Blaydes is, like, if he doesn't set up his takedowns well, he could get clipped. And you mentioned the dangers at heavyweight, like a powerful counter striker like Jairzinho Rozenstruik, who probably is training all camp to time a takedown to land something big. Like, it wouldn't shock me, man, especially after watching it happen with Derek Lewis, where he pretty much just telegraphed it and he paid the price for it. But I do like Blaydes here. I wouldn't bet it at the money line. No shot. I think the way to target is the way you did it. Fight doesn't go, or maybe look to bet like a round specific knockout prop on Rozenstruik and hope that you pick the right round where he times the takedown and maybe clips him coming in or something like that. But overall, I think it's rinse and repeat takedowns by Blaydes. Maybe some ground and pound stoppage within the cards, but overall, I think Blaydes probably rolls here.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention that doesn't go the distance. About minus 180 offshore at domestic books. I think the best I could see is a minus 200 over on DraftKings. And John, if you're betting Rozenstruik round props, I would just bet the first round, because I think if Blaydes takes him down the first round and has success, hopefully he learned, like, just take him down in the second round and do it again. Hopefully he learned something from the Derek Lewis fight. Evan, you will bring up the rear here on the heavyweights on the main card. Curtis Blaydes versus Jairzinho Rozenstruik. Any bets, props, sides, whatnot? Anything catch your attention here?
I don't have any bets currently at the moment, but if I were to get some action, I'd probably take a little bit of action on Jair Rozenstruik. Again, just being a plus 250 dog in a heavyweight fight where anything can happen, really, right? I mean, Jair can land one big strike and Curtis Blaydes is out, right? I mean, we saw the same game plan from Derek Lewis when he won against Curtis Blaydes. So it's within the realm of possibilities, and it's something we have to account for, especially in DFS. That's definitely within the range of outcomes. But really, I don't have any bets here. I will say that Jair Rozenstruik's takedown defense has been half decent, better than I think people give him credit for in his time in the UFC. And that might change the path to victory for Curtis Blaydes into where he has to get the standing knockout. So that might be a good bet on I like the round one knockout prop there, but a round two knockout prop actually isn't crazy. Just saying, like, the fatigue could wear in the first round with all the wrestling and whatnot, and then just getting a second round knockout, maybe third round knockout. So I think that's where the value lies here. But other than that, I don't have any action.
Fair enough. Let's move on to our first of 3 5-round fights. I'm just tossing that out there as another reminder. We will have our buddy Connor on in a little bit to talk about DFS general strategy, but off the top of my head, I can only really remember 3 or so cards that have had these 3 5-round title fights. The first Usman versus Covington fight had it. There was a fight card earlier this year with 3 title fights on it, I want to say, as well. So we've seen this situation before when Nate Diaz fought in a 5-round against Leon Edwards, and that was Moreno and Adesanya fought on that card. That was also the same situation, but certainly a not so frequent situation here with 3 separate fights that are all scheduled for 5 championship rounds. First of which, we got Nick Diaz making his return to the octagon here after, what is it, a 6-year layoff at this point. I think everyone's excited to see him back in there. Kind of difficult, I think, to kind of project what's going to happen here. We got Robbie Lawler minus 150, 8.3K. Diaz comes back plus 130, 7.9K in a rematch that's been 17 years in the making. And look, all week, this was lined pretty closely. And then we have an interview come out last night. Nick Diaz with I think it was Brett Okamoto, as well as some still shots of him shadow boxing and whatnot, kind of for the media day. I believe that's on Wednesday. And the line suddenly, like, the steam came in on Robbie Lawler. And I'm not going to lie, I was a part of it. I bet Robbie Lawler at minus 120. I think Evan might have a bone to pick with that. I'll get to him in a second. But to me, kind of just outside of all the stuff we saw in Fight Week, I don't think it's totally like Nick Diaz has had weird ass interviews throughout the entirety of his career. I'm not like an MMA OG. Like, I wasn't even really watching UFC consistently the last time Nick fought in 2015. Like, I was a fan of the sport. Like, I knew who Nick was, but it wasn't like every week I was sitting down to watch 12, 13 fights. If you go back and watch like his media stuff, like, he's always been the way he was yesterday. So I didn't really think that mattered, but like, the idea of moving up to 185 on Fight Week, just kind of the way he looked shadow boxing. And then also the fact that, like, the guy's been fought in 6 years. And last time we saw him, I don't want to dive too deep into the narratives here, but like, it's very publicized that he's been like partying in Vegas for the last 5 years, like doing a lot of drugs, a lot of drinking and whatnot. And Robbie Lawler, let's be honest, like, he hasn't looked great of late. But man, he's been fighting guys like Colby Covington, Ben Askren. Like, I know people make memes, but like, Ben Askren was a big fight at the time. RDA, former champion. Tyron Woodley, former champion. Neil Magny, not a great stylistic matchup. And look, the optics haven't been great for Robbie, but man, I think you just kind of got to blind bet a guy at minus 120 who's been competing in the UFC against someone who hasn't fought for 6 years and has been doing kind of God knows what outside of the cage. So I played a piece of Robbie Lawler, maybe on the square, coming in with the rest of the money like everyone else was last night. But Evan, I'll go to you first here because I saw your tweet this morning kind of about the line movement regarding this fight. Do you have a side here or just kind of, I don't know, you find the movement interesting?
No, I got 2 units on Lawler when he was minus 110 on FanDuel. Right. So, I mean, I woke up this morning, I saw the potential closing line value and I was salivating. Right. Yeah. So I was a huge fan of that. But yeah, just the fact that promo video was enough to steam the line to minus 147. No, I mean, realistically, it's like Lawler has just looked better. And I mean, just for context as to how long ago that fight was, the first fight, I was in first grade. I wasn't even allowed to watch UFC when, my parents wouldn't let me.
I was 4 years old.
Time. Yeah,
you guys stole my thunder. I was gonna make a joke that you guys were in diapers the first time these guys fought, but now you stole my thunder there.
No, but for real though, it's like right this time around, it's like this isn't even close. I don't even know how it's not even like minus 300 yet. Honestly, Lawler has such a huge advantage here, and it can't be baked into the stats just because it's going to take into account what Nick Diaz did last time. We saw him his last 5 fights in the, between UFC, Strikeforce, whatever. And then, Lawler's actually doing something in the UFC right now. So it's like, I would take Lawler to even minus 300 if I really had to.
That's a hot take. Evan, that's a hotter take than I have. But I honestly think it could be one of those scenarios where, like, I don't know. I tend to be one of those people who I think, like, in major markets, which the UFC is kind of becoming in terms of betting, like, I tend to think the closing line is pretty predictive moving forward. Like, I think it's rare. Like, sometimes we see a minus 150 and then they dominate and everyone's like, oh, we should have been minus 500. And it's like, well, if we ran the fight back tomorrow, like, it'd probably be minus 180. But, like, that doesn't happen every time. I do think there's, like, legitimate upside here for us to watch 5 minutes of Nick Diaz and be like, holy shit, there was no chance this guy was ever 45% to win a UFC fight. And maybe that's baked into the line a little bit because I think stylistically it's not an awful fight for Nick in terms of like the output he's able to put up. But we've done a lot of narrative talk. John, I guess I'll let you go last here. Like, what do you make of the stylistics in this fight? I know it's so easy to talk about in the narrative, and I know we stole your thunder, and I talked about it, and Evan talked about it, but like, how do you kind of see this fight playing out from a stylistic point of view? Because I think it's interesting. Everyone's talking about this fight. I haven't really heard a lot of analysis, myself included, in terms of like what actually goes down in terms of the mixed martial arts in the cage on Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what you guys are talking about. Diaz should be fighting Usman for the belt here. Like, I don't know why this fight is getting made. I don't know who made this fight, why it's happening. No, I mean, in terms of the matchup, the reason why nobody's really talking about it is because how can you confidently say what's like how this fight is going to play out? We have no idea. Like, we haven't seen Diaz for 5 years. The last time we saw him against Anderson Silva, he spent most of his time taunting around the cage. Like, he did the famous lay down and look back, and he's showing his butt to him during the fight, like what Nate did. Nate does a lot of that too. But yeah, I mean, I think this could be a fight where it's like Diaz is losing, but he's showboating, lands a couple good punches, and everyone gets riled up. Like similar to Nate's last fight, like he lost, but come after the fight, like he lost and nobody cared. Like Nate's stock went up after the fight. Like I could see something like that happening. In terms of the matchup, though, I mean, I think you have to favor Lawler in the striking just as the more active fighter, but also I think even previously, I think he had more power, whereas Diaz was probably a better technical boxer. Lawler had much more power. I know the first fight you could pretty much throw out the window. It was 17 years ago, but both guys had success on the feet. Diaz kind of owned the center and moved forward more. Both guys hurt each other a little bit. The thing about Diaz is, like, I'm not going to completely write him off here. Like, I know obviously the shadow boxing video, like all the fake sharps are like, oh, gotta bet Lawler now. He looked terrible shadow boxing and he doesn't have a six pack anymore. Like, I think that's a little overblown, but no. I think betting him as a pick -120, Lawler is good. I'm talking about the people who are now like laying -140 on Raul B. Lawler. Yeah, I know. I want to make that clear though, in case people don't pick up on our sarcasm, but yeah, I mean, I think this is just like I'm with the same view as Prodigy in the chat. Like, I think there's just way too many question marks here for me to put my money on it. Like, I also think like just everything about this fight in general is kind of sketchy. Like the fact they changed the weight class a few days out, like it reeks of like something weird happening, like a weird injury, a weird stoppage. Maybe it's a competitive decision and the judges give it to Diaz when everyone thought Lawler won, just so they can, UFC can be like, oh, Nate's back because they know it's good for the company. Like there's so many things, and all of it, like there's no data or analysis to really back it up. But all of those things combined with the 5-year layoff from Diaz, whether or not what style he's going to come out with, what he's going to look like all of those things just lead to a pass for me. Adam says, be a man and bet Lawler. Maybe I should, but I'm probably not going to, but hopefully he comes through for you guys. I don't know, man. I can't do it.
Yeah, it's funny because all week I was talking about how like I'm not going to bet on this fight. I even started my write up, in the bet tracker. There's like the little blurb I'm able to write. And Maddie Muse, who is a follower, he's in the Discord always. He made fun of me because like it was literally a bet, and it started with I said all week I wouldn't bet this fight, and then I did it. And that's just kind of my thought here. Like, John, I don't think you're like missing out by passing on this fight. It's probably the smart thing to do. All right, let's move on to the co-main here. We got Valentina Shevchenko, massive -1700 favorite against Lauren Murphy. Lauren Murphy's put together a win streak, still comes in plus 850 here. Valentina is 9.5K on DraftKings, which I think is the most kind of important conversation surrounding this fight. But before we do that, I just quickly want to ask, we just went through the last fight where it was basically all narrative talk, and we've been pretty data-driven throughout the show. Evan, I'm curious, what does your model, if you have it like readily available, like what do you put Valentina's chances at? Like, do you have is it even quantifiable? Like, what do you have for at to win this fight?
94.5%. She wins this fight.
Okay, what is that like? That's about market. That's like -1700-ish. Big exposure.
Yeah. It's weird too because like I put it into the computer and it's like, oh, here's the Kelly bets, like, you know, the high Kelly percentage, and it's like, oh, there's still value in Valentina Shevchenko because she was like 11-17 at Unibet earlier in the week. I'm like, no, do better, model, do better computer.
Not laying it straight. All right, let's talk about kind of the more important thing here. I don't know, Evan, do you have anything to add kind of stylistically, or is basically your model says she's 94% to win the fight, the betting line's 94%, and that's about it?
Yeah, I mean that's my betting take. My DFS take would just be that she has such high finish equity that you might need her depending on the volume she can get before the finish happens. Because she will, I mean, at her price, she's going to have to get volume. You know, she can't just go in, you know, throw a few punches, you know, get the 90 points and then a few strikes. Like, she's going to have to do some work. And I think she will, you know, based on what we've seen from her. You know, she's going to get her takedowns for sure. You know, so even if she does get a finish, she has a very good chance of being in the optimal lineup by the end of the night.
Yeah, I agree with that. I won't really add much for this fight because I think it's lined appropriately. Like, I think Valentina is going to commit an assault inside of an octagon, and we're all going to pay or stream a pay-per-view and watch it happen. John, I'll kick it to you. Any thoughts kind of here stylistically? And if you want to just save your DFS take, because I liked Evans, but why don't we save the Valentina conversation for when Connor comes on, just because I think that that's probably one of the bigger conversations we had this week. So anything in terms of the money line, are you getting on Lauren Murphy here, plus 850?
Come on now, you know better than that. I don't even think Lauren Murphy beat Andrea Lee. I don't think Lauren Murphy beat Joanne Calderwood. Like, why is this fight happening? I don't have a take here. I think Valentina absolutely rolls over Lauren Murphy. You know, I guess credit to her for making it this high, you know, as someone who I think is just really an above average fighter in this weight class. I don't think she belongs at the top echelon of this division. But yeah, I think Valentina, like Evan said, I mean, I think she probably gets a finish here. It's just a matter of when.
Yeah, I think it's interesting here. The conversation we'll have is that, like, Lauren Murphy's pretty aggressive. She moves forward. I think she's tough, but I think that hinges on how aggressive Valentina will get, because sometimes she kind of lets her opponents control the pace. Like, they're going to come after her, Valentina will just murder them. And if they kind of play no pitter patter on the outside, she's kind of comfortable to do that for a little bit. Let's move on to the main event here. We won't spend too much time there on the co-main with a 95% favorite in Valentina, but this is a closer fight, kind of according to conventional wisdom. The market, I think pretty much anyone you ask is excited for this fight. Alexander Volkanovski is a -175 favorite here for the featherweight strap, trying to defend it for the second time, defend his belt for the second time against Brian T-City Ortega. Comes back +150. Ortega's second title shot after getting pretty much outclassed by Max Holloway a few years ago. DraftKings prices here: Volk 8.6K, Ortega 7.6K. And I have a full preview of this fight up on ftnbets.com. It's like picks, odds, picks, preview, something like that. There's like 3 P's in there. But I wrote up an entire write-up of this fight. I'll go first, just real quick here on the main event. I let you guys go first all night. I'll steal the thunder in the main event. I actually have a pretty big bet here on Alexander Volkanovski. I talked off the top of the show how, I think the UFC market is getting a little bit more efficient, specifically in like these massive markets where you could really get a lot of money down in an Alexander Volkanovski versus Ortega title fight in Vegas. Like, I think most of the time that these are pretty accurate markets, but man, like, I think that Volk is a much bigger favorite than what the market currently implies. I like to think that the closing price is usually accurate, especially in super liquid markets, but I just think that this is such a good fight stylistic for Alexander Volkanovski, who I think is kind of perennially underrated by the market. Like, I think this is a top 3, maybe 5 at the worst pound for pound fighter in the world. Super high fight IQ, ability to wrestle, ability to strike, really great feinting game, has shown us KO power in the past. I just think that Volkanovski is the type of guy who, at -175 against a guy like Brian Ortega, who I like Brian Ortega, but let's face it, like, this is a very finish reliant fighter against someone who is historically extremely durable and extremely high IQ. Like, Brian Ortega, his list of UFC wins, he's got a good resume, but I mean, he was struggling in fights like the Clay Guida fight. When he fought Moicano, he was struggling there. Even the Cubs Swanson fight, he was struggling. He really struggles to win minutes in fights, and he's a great finisher, and we have to give credit to him for that. And honestly, finishing ability is something that I tend to underrate in the long term, and maybe that's a leak in my betting game. But to me, like, Ortega is so reliant on a finish here. And like, I think he needs to land a big overhand. Like his striking looked better in the Korean Zombie fight. I'm sure someone will bring that up, but I still think Volk clearly a better striker in terms of winning minutes and probably even power. Like I think Ortega needs to get to like a front headlock submission is his path to victory. And at plus 150, I think that's just way off. So I think it's up to I bet 2 units at minus 170 for Volkanovski, and then it went to minus 150. I kind of panicked thinking I was going to like have negative COV on a title fight and a multiple unit bet. So I added at minus 150, but we're back like minus 178. I'm curious to see where this will close. I see a minus 184 on FanDuel right now. Anyway, I've been talking for like 5 minutes. I think Volkanovski rolls this weekend. John, I will let you go next here. Title fight between Ortega and Volk.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping. I was trying to time the market when we saw Ortega money coming in. I'm like, man, if I'm about to get Volkanovski minus 140, that's going to be. And now where it's at now, like I don't have a bet on it. I agree with most of what you said. I don't really have much to add. I think Volkanovski has a clear striking advantage, even though we saw improvements from Ortega in the striking when he came out against Korean Zombie off the long layoff. Like his striking looked much better. But I don't think it's to the level of Volkanovski, especially the diversity of Volkanovski's attack. He's going to mix in those calf kicks quite a bit. He's got solid boxing as well. I think Ortega almost has to force grappling exchanges here to have a chance, and I'm just not convinced he'll do that. He's looked to wrestle a little bit more in his previous fights than he did throughout his career. But Volkanovski, he's got that shorter frame, good takedown defense, and I think he's a brown belt as well. Like, it's not like he's just completely dead if the fight does go to the mat. So I think he covers here. I think Volkanovski's probably the side, and don't really have too much to add. What about you, Evan?
Volk is definitely the side. When I tell you some of these striking differences between these two guys, it's going to be, insane, right? Because like, Brian Ortega has a negative 2.95 per minute striking differential, whereas Volk is positive 2.15, right? And this is distance striking, right? This isn't even total striking. And Brian Ortega is only defending 60% of takedown attempts against him in his last 5 fights. Volk is attempting 4.5 takedown attempts per 15 minutes. And then the striking is way more efficient on Volk by like 15% more efficient striker. Volk is, it's like, and Volk is also absorbing 4 fewer strikes per minute. So it's like, I don't find this fight to be close. I have Volk as currently a minus 195 favorite. I bet him at minus 160 for 2 units. So yeah, I'm totally on the Volkanovski side here.
Nice. All right. Well, it's nice to get a consensus to close the betting aspect of the show. Evan, thank you for coming on and breaking down 13 fights with us. Before we get you out of here and Connor joins us for the DFS show, feel free to plug the Twitter, whatever work you want to plug before we get you out of here. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, man. My Twitter, you can follow me over there. I talk about a lot of nerdy data crap, about a lot of different sports. So if you like stats, if you like Canadian football, you can follow me on Twitter at eChaney69. That's at ECHENEY 69 on Twitter. And I had a lot of fun talking UFC with you guys because I don't have the outlet to talk to the people like you guys do. So this was fun.
We appreciate you joining us. We'll have to do it again, especially for pay-per-view cards like this. I think more people want to hear other people, not just me and Jonah, yell at each other for an hour and a half every week. So we definitely appreciate you joining us. Everyone definitely go give him a follow on Twitter. He's a pretty good follow. And just avoid if he tries to swindle you in any CFFC bets like he did to me. But appreciate it as always. We'll bring in Connor now and talk through the DFS slate. But thanks again, Evan.
Yeah, man.
Oops. All right.
We got Connor in the building now. All right, everyone who's watching, we can welcome Connor. Connor's doing FTN daily content with us, cheat sheets, exposures. This is a guy who casually 52 GPP wins in his life, lifetime ROI over 23%. Comes to FTN daily. He's in the Discord chopping it up and casually just splits a bink in MMA the first week. He's with us. So welcome, Connor, to the show. How are you doing, man? We're excited to talk DFS with you.
Fellas, appreciate it. Good to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, certainly an exciting week for DraftKings. We'll jump right into it now. We've been rolling for an hour and a half. We'll go a little bit here for those of you guys who are interested in the DFS angles here. I guess we'll just kind of alternate talking about topics. I'll go first here. This is a card with 3 separate 5-round fights, which is something that we haven't really seen too much historically. There was a card at the end of, 2019? I believe a card earlier this year in Arizona, but certainly not a circumstance that we see often. How do you kind of approach, Connor, the idea of like having 6 fighters in the pool that have potential 5-round upside?
So I kind of feel like a broken record because I feel like I bring this up every week in the Discord, is that, there's a lot of variables that can impact it, but one big way to differentiate, especially in these big tournaments, is leaving money on the table. I looked back since the scoring system changed. The lowest I found, there was a couple of times 48-2 got it done for the optimal, but 48-5, not uncommon at all. And when you add in 3 5-rounders, that's just even more opportunity for one of those underdogs to hit. And if that's the case, that gives you more opportunity for that, that lower salary cap to bring the threshold down. So for me, that's one of those factors I'm looking at. If we have a late replacement, that's a good reason to bring your minimum salary down, because usually they end up being mispriced with the replacement that comes in. Not necessarily the case this week. More fights on the card and more 5-rounders, because that's more opportunity to rack up points. So that's going to be the biggest thing I look at this week, is that, I probably would have done it already with how many fights we have on the card, but certainly a week that I'm going to have my minimum salary probably down at 48.5. I'm guessing, having not finished projections yet.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point you brought up, because even though you said you may sound like a broken record, like it's reflected in the field. Like not nobody's doing it, but the field is not doing it enough, right? Like we see the data, like it's not happening enough. And that's a great way to get unique. So I'm glad you brought that up. I wanted to ask you though, about the expensive range on DraftKings. Like we have a lot of fighters priced above 9K. A lot of them, we think feel pretty safe here. Now it's just, we need to determine, who is probably the better, more upside play per se, like between, we have so many fighters in the expensive range: Taila, Santos, Valentina, Semelsberger. Talk through kind of what you're doing with the expensive range. And if so, like, because we know they're going to be obviously popular, most of them are going to be owned. Like how are you approaching it in terms of differentiation throughout the rest of your lineup after going through your key targets in the expensive range?
Yeah, for sure. So for better or worse, ultimately I end up being a slave to projections. And so whatever my projections end up saying when I finish them, I usually don't finish that until after weigh-ins, because things change if somebody passes out on the scales or something like that. So I don't finish that until then. But for me, you're talking about that upper range, like Valentina, we've seen what she can do, right? The past 2 times she's put up over 130. Like you pretty much have to have that. There's almost no scenario where that doesn't, end up in the nuts. Taila Santos, probably not too crazy for me, because she fights Roxy, who is old, and we know what we're getting with her, but has the potential to have that kind of fight where she just grinds it out against the fence and really suppresses output on both sides. So that doesn't excite me that much. And then Semelsberger, don't get me started on this guy. There's just, there's some guys, for better or worse, I just hate him. And Semelsberger, he falls in that category for me. I'm taping him the first time before that debut with Carlton Minus. And I don't know if you guys have seen this fight. I think it was 2 before his debut. He's fighting this guy in like a Chuck E. Cheese, and they're like playing his walkout song on like a boombox or something. It's terrible. The guy's like a high school wrestler and just tosses him around for 2 minutes. And Semelsberger ends up winning the fight because the other guy breaks his hand like on a takedown or something. It's ridiculous. I don't know if you guys saw this.
Yeah,
I've
seen it.
Yeah, so after that, all in on my boy Jason Witt in his second fight, and he takes a 2-piece combo to the forehead and sits down and ends both of our nights early. And it's all right. Jason Witt's still my boy, but like Semelsberger, I have no desire to go there. I know he's fighting, the Diaz guy who hasn't fought in like 6 years and looks terrible, like an awful athlete. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe that guy can land like a trip takedown and submit this bum Semelsberger. I don't know. So for me, out of those 3, feed me Valentina, because like I said, Taila, she can get pushed up against the fence a little bit. Maybe that kind of suppresses the output, in my opinion. And then the Semelsberger guy, I can't help it. Obviously, however he projects is how he projects, and I'll play him. But Man, I will never go out of my way to play that guy.
Yeah, there's going to be no subjective bump from Connor in the projections this week for Matty Semelsberger, who's a guy who I'm not really high on, but I somehow have like a lot of money behind this weekend. Got in at early prices in the betting market. One thing I wanted to talk about, John might have another question as well before we get out of here, but you mentioned kind of two things in terms of how you alter your min salary while making, mass multi-entry for MMA. One of them was, a lot of fights. Another one was having multiple 5-round fights. But the last one you mentioned, which kind of comes with the caveat that it might not be the case this week, is when we get late replacement fighters. Like this week, have Nick Maximov fight Cody Brundage on short notice, and Maximov goes from being kind of a pick'em just about against Carl Roberson to being not as big a favorite as it looked like he might be. He opened at minus 300, now like minus 150 across the market. But Maximov's a solid favorite. He's $8,000 on DK. And for reference, like guys above him, Robbie Lawler obviously is above him, about the same price in the betting market now. But we got guys like Uros Medic, who is basically a pick'em compared to Maximov. And I think Maximov's going to come in with a decent amount of ownership. And there's obviously a few ways you can, kind of play with that. Like, do you get overweight on a guy like Maximov, who might be chalky but could potentially be good chalk? Or are you looking to kind of leverage the field here and maybe take some Cody Brundage? Not massively inexpensive, but certainly a leverage spot if there's one on this card.
So most cases, I'm usually a guy where if I feel good about it, I'm going to take leverage over the field and just smash the chalk, especially in like, less variant sports like NBA or something. I'm definitely a guy. Like if a guy's 50% owned, I think he's a legit play. Give me 90, 95, 100%. I'm fine with that. With Maximov though, and I think it's reflected both in the betting market and, I came in on the tail end of you guys talking about that fight, but I think that was one of those that most of us looked at immediately and were like, oh, this is like definitely a closer fight than like the plus 300 or whatever that it opened at, where it's like both guys look like solid. I mean, Brundage is totally game. Like he's a good wrestler. I'm not going to break down the fight. I know you guys talked about it, but this isn't a spot where I'm like super eager to like jump on that. Especially because both guys have kind of limited fighting experience, especially fighting against the same style. So I don't think there's a good way to know like who's going to be the better wrestler in this spot, or like who's going to have the better cardio come round 3 if these guys have been going at it, grappling for 10 minutes straight. So typically a late replacement like this, a guy who's a wrestler, like that's usually an absolute smash. But it just so happens this week he's also taking on now a super tough wrestler who trains at a good gym, who has legit experience, who can wrestle. Like, so this is not a week where I'm just going to go out of my way. If for some strange reason that, the projections end up that way, then I will, but definitely not a week where I'm going to go out of my way to smash Maximov, which I was planning on doing when he was fighting Roberson, because that guy can't defend a takedown, but here we are.
Yeah, I think we were all in the same boat there. Like, I think we really liked Maximov in the Roberson matchup for the grappling upside. And now it's like we're all kind of not getting cold feet, but in a sense, like you mentioned, like he's facing a guy who might even be a better wrestler and probably a better striker. So if we're going to get leverage on Brundage, I think that's the way to attack it. I think being overweight to this fight in general is probably a good spot, just being overweight to both sides. But the last thing I wanted to talk about, like you talked through the expensive range, and it sounds like you're more on the Valentina side. So I'll open this up to Jonah as well. Like, do you guys have any concern with her not scoring as much because maybe the takedowns aren't necessarily there as much? Like in her previous matchups, the takedowns were pretty likely. Like, I don't know if she's just going to come out here and take Lauren Murphy down like 5 times or whatever. Like, obviously she still has one of the highest floors and ceilings on the slate, but I'm just trying to think through, like, is her floor as high as maybe we think it is? Because I don't know if it's going to be like a super wrestle heavy game plan against Lauren Murphy here. But what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I'll let Connor go first here because I think I kind of have maybe a contrarian take on. So Connor, you could go first here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. For one, I think a lot of Lauren Murphy's wrestling success has come just because she's a more physical fighter than most of her opponents, and so she just muscles them down. It's not like she has a good judo game where she lands like some high skilled trips or like is shooting doubles or anything like that. It's usually she's just stronger than the girl across from her, is able to drag her down. So, like, gun to my head right now, I think and I haven't finalized this, but I think I'll probably end up projecting Valentina for like 2.5 or 3 takedowns. So not like a ton, but at the same time, like, I don't think she's going to have any trouble, You know, I think in the same way people thought, well, Andrade, she can wrestle a little bit. She's a strong girl, like very physical. And we saw Valentina just ragdoll her. And so do I think Lauren Murphy, who's 38 and kind of looks like a gym teacher, no respect to Mary, no, but like, you know, do I think Valentina can like not wrestle her? I'm not worried about it, to be honest.
Yeah, I think my answer is just kind of like Valentina, as elite as she is, she kind of lets her opponent dictate the pace a little bit at times. And that's what I was talking about towards the back end when we had Evan on. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just means like if you're going to be a Liz Carmouche and just kind of not throw anything and stare at her, like she's just going to, like, she'll clearly beat you 50-45, but she's not necessarily like going out of her way. But like a Jessica Andrade or Caitlin Chukagian who tried to kind of take the fight to her. And that sounds weird with Caitlin Chukagian, but like she engaged in that fight and like Valentina will take your head and rip it clean off. So I don't know if this really answers the wrestling question, but like Lauren Murphy's aggressive, man. And all she really knows is like going forward, biting the mouthpiece, being tough, landing takedowns and winning close split decisions. Like, in order to get her 3-5% chance to win the fight, like I think she's going to try to do that. And so just kind of the wrestling aside, like if I think Murphy's going to come after Valentina, like she doesn't strike me as the type who's just going to stare at her. Like she knows she can't win a kickboxing fight. She probably doesn't know she can't win a grappling fight, but we all know that. So hopefully she goes for it. And it just kind of raises Valentina's ceiling, allowing her to fight at a high level pace. But I think that's kind of all I had for questions. We did 13 fights with Evan, Connor on the show as well for DFS. John, I guess I'll kick it back to you. If you have anything you want to ask Connor or talk about the slate in general, and if not, you could feel free to just take us out of here. We've been going an hour 45, big slate. Sounds like everyone's excited for it. So yeah, John, take it away.
Yeah. Thank you guys for answering that. I mean, I was more so just trying to think through ways that she can't be optimal. Like you mentioned the previous fight, Jonah, where she scored like 65 DraftKings points, like clearly dominated the fight, but it's not that she can't wrestle Lauren Murphy, but maybe she just doesn't. Was more what I was thinking. But overall, I mean, she's obviously a great play. Going to be a big target for me as well. Shout out to Connor for joining us, talking through the DFS side of things. We're definitely going to have him back on for one of the full length shows when he's able to. But thank you all for joining us. We definitely appreciate it. The rest of our content will be up on ftndaily.com, ftnbets.com, including the cheat sheet, which has all three of our exposures, Connor's GPP exposures, the same with me and Jonah as well. All of that completely free at ftndaily.com. We appreciate you guys joining us. I'm John Kelly. That's Jonah Shiffman. And Connor, I'm sorry, I don't know your last name, so I'm going to say that's CCC0017. This is the Undisputed MMA show presented by the FTN Network, saying goodbye and good luck, and we will see you guys next time.